All right. Hey,
Hey
everybody.
everyone.
Mr. Bernstein, go for it. It's all yours.
Hey everyone. It's Sunday, February 8th, and it's Tinderbox Meetup with Michael Becker, which is my cue apparently for my internet going unstable, but we will see. Today we have Daniel Tubb, a professor of anthropology at New Brunswick, on multiple AIs in Tinderbox. So, backstage this week, we've been talking about Tinderbox annoyances and aches and pains, in part because AI has changed the feasibility of re-engineering things that are merely annoying, or especially things that just annoy some people. And I want to very quickly share my screen, show one example. This is a Tinderbox map of part of a Zoom talk I'm giving later today. This is Super Bowl Sunday. This is great. And I'm about to press Control Option Command. And as you see, it rescales properly. This came up Friday afternoon, and it was rescaling by the end of Friday afternoon. And this is a miserable piece of code. I've been revisiting this uh, at least three or four times over the years, and it's never been completely satisfactory. Uh, where is my screen stop share? Uh, Now I'm only part way through what's going to turn out to be a massive refactoring to keep this sort of thing from happening again. I have in Tinderbox at the very basement a class called S-Point that knows how to do arithmetic and such with points in 2D space, which Tinderbox does a lot of. But we don't want super points. We want super super points in view space and super points in map space, the map coordinates we all know from x pose and y pose and height and width. Separating these out requires literally thousands, maybe 10,000 individual changes, and things can get very bad very quickly. And I can confuse myself very easily with coordinate transforms. But Claude doesn't do this very well on its own. And Claude doesn't see really the reason for doing it. But what Claude will do is do proof after proof to determine which kind of coordinate point we want to use at this point in time. And after 17 of these, my eyes glaze over. It's just boring. It's tricky, it's mathematical, and I've just done it 17 times. There's only a few thousand more left. Our slaves of steel don't care. They like that stuff. Uh, so, wild times, and without further delay, here's Michael Becker.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to our February 8th meetup. Very exciting. And we typical format is we go around the room and we have new people introduce themselves. And I do see, I can't pronounce his name, Nerathron, something like that.
Hello.
Mr. G.
Thank,
You're new.
thank
So
you
we have
very
new
much.
people introduce themselves. And let's have you do it in just a second. We
Can
then dig into topics and ideas that our people are interested in. And then if we have a theme, which we do today, we jump into that. And Daniel Tubb will be talking to us about his AI router strategies, which we're all very excited to hear. So, with that in mind, though, let's do some brief introductions. So, Mr. G, what brings you here?
Hello, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I have been watching the recordings. This is the first time I'm joining. I'm joining from Singapore, so it's already after midnight, so I might not be here for long, but hope to join you in the future meetings. But looking forward to whatever I can gather before I have to retire for today. Thanks.
Good for you. And on that note, by the way, we have made several failed attempts on scheduling meetups for the Asian region, like Friday night West Coast time for a Saturday morning Asian meetup. So, if or somewhere along those lines. So, if there's anybody out there that's interested in helping me do that. Art and I tried it a couple times and it's just completely failed. So if anybody has the secret sauce on how to get our Asian community, aka the people living in Asia community, engaged in our meetups, I'd love to find a way to do that. So, Mr. G, if you have some ideas, that would be helpful.
Sure, I will do that. Thank you very much.
Mr. Spriggs, you're relatively new. I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, I've been using Tinderbox for a long time, off and on. I'm sort of an old time data slinger. I sort of go in and out, and today I'm in.
Awesome. Love it. Welcome back. Okay, well, without further ado, let's have Daniel kick it off because I think we're all excited to hear what he has to say. So, Daniel, maybe you can. Where'd you go? Did we just lose him? It looked like he dropped off into ether space. He's been having Zoom trouble, so let's see if he give him a sense to come back. While we're waiting for Daniel to come back, anybody else have any projects they're working on that they want to discuss or share? No?
Oh, I see Chuck. I see Chuck sort of mouthing silent words.
No? Nothing going on? Yeah, Christoph. Good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah. Hi. So yeah, I'm also, I would say, like an on and off Tinderbox user, and there's always like so many new things happening that I have difficulty to really get it going again because many of the old functions disappeared and so forth. So my project that I'm really want to have going is a workflow that where I have my most like everyday nodes in Obsidian, and then when I work on a project which really requires the whole skills of the Tinderbox environment, then how to move this in and out or something like that. So have a smooth connection between Obsidian and Tinderbox.
Well, I have a few ideas on that. One, Obsidian does have its own MCP servers you might want to look at or play with. Tom and I have been toying with this challenge for a long time, and the cleanest workflow we've gotten was because you run the collection fallacy. You don't necessarily want all of your Obsidian nodes in Tinderbox because that would just be a collection fallacy mess. It'd be a nightmare. So what we found the best workflow is, do you use DevonThink?
Yeah, I have, yes.
Yeah. So put a DevonThink indexing watch folder onto your Obsidian vault, and so that will bring all of your Obsidian notes into DevonThink. You then can use
have that. Yeah.
You can then use DevonThink's AI and search to zero in on those notes that are relevant to the project you're working on. You then can drag those notes over into Tinderbox. And by so doing that, what that does too is that will also bring the DevonThink URL over with you. So if you ever want to go back to the source note in DevonThink, you can. And so, so you use DevonThink as your kind of like Tinderbox is my 5 states. Tinderbox is your collection environment. DevonThink is your kind of repository search storage because Obsidian search sucks. It's terrible to try to find anything. You use DevonThink for your kind of curation, and then when you're ready to start to create, you pull that over into Tinderbox.
So just to be clear then, because I have this, all my Obsidian is in Tinderbox, in DevonThink as an indexed folder. Right. And so, but inside of DevonThink, then it has a different URL, which then could be used for backlinking.
Correct. So, and that's inherently native within the Dev. You don't have to do anything. That's just part of the DevonThink integration between Tinderbox.
Okay. Yeah, if that is the best state of art so far, then
it's awesome. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And that really what that does is it lends you from not pulling too much stuff over to Tinderbox.
Yeah.
And it keeps you maintaining that and if you want to take it a step further, you could do a Tinderbox watch folder and have Tinderbox watching that folder. But I find that kind of it just creates too much crap. Yeah. You want that manual friction of thinking. Okay, I actually want this over in my thinking folder, which is Tinderbox.
Yeah, I think the Tinderbox for me never really scaled too much. When it gets too bloated, then it slows down and crashes and all kinds of problems. Yeah.
Well, I just find it's just stuff gets in the way. The collection fallacy is real. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. All right, Daniel, you're back. The floor is yours. We can't hear you if you're talking, can't see you, and he's gone again.
No, yeah, he is.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? So I've got one that's kind of interesting. Is I was having a conversation with my son last week, and I can't get into the nature of the context of the conversation, but his observation was really interesting in that um, he had picked up some narratives from another party, and he had not heard alternative narratives before, and his comment was astoundingly insightful. He's like, isn't it amazing that once you hear a narrative or storyline from another party 2 or 3 or 4 times, how that narrative can become solidified and become truth, and you stop looking for other evidence to validate or invalidate that truth, and that just becomes how you operate. And then and how difficult it can be sometimes, and how you sometimes need a punch in the face to get you to wake up and see that there is a potential alternative story. And as I was thinking about that, having that conversation with him, it really popped into my mind how Tinderbox is just such an amazing environment to help us with that punch in the face, like help us have that ability to if we so choose. It's like Mission Impossible. If you choose to accept it, you will be disavowed if you're killed and dead and all that. But if you choose to go, accept the mission, Tinderbox is such an amazing environment to have parallel narratives and competing narratives coexisting in the same cognitive environment to allow you to you curate these thoughts. And I was just wondering if anybody had any reaction or comment to like best approaches and thoughts around that. And Mr. Bernstein or Anderson, I'm talking about. So maybe you have some reflections on that idea. Or anybody, what are your thoughts about that? Using Tinderbox to help you navigate and curate competing narratives.
I'll chime in.
All right.
I just picked up a book. I've long held the book, or known the book, had the book. Economic Interpretation of the Constitution. Anybody ever heard of it? Read it?
No.
Unlikely.
Could you drop it in the chat? That sounds awesome.
Okay, and it's 100 years old. 1913, published in 1913. Considered in the day. Think of how intellectually small the world was in 1913. It raises, I'm only, I think, 10 or 11 pages into it. It's a writing style that's too ponderous for my taste. That's the kind of book I pick up and read 5 pages and put away. The thesis is basically that the framers of the Constitution are actually looking after their wallets. And this was in the dialogue of the day, was considered extremely radical. But it brings up the issue of how, our legal system, when you trace back through Parliament and the kings and all that kind of stuff, is largely based on physical property. And digital just completely destroys the concepts of boundaries.
Yes.
Because witness Mr. G, other side of the world, and we can have a conversation with basically, and across cultures, across time zones, across experiences, professions, and it's a real challenge. So that's my 2 cents, and I'll go get the link.
Fascinating. And on that note, by the way, since we're speaking of words, I want to share this with you while we wait. So I don't know if anybody's familiar with Seth Godin. Seth Godin is a preeminent marketer. He is the gentleman who coined the term permission-based marketing back in 1992. And it's really kind of established a lot of what we call modern consent-based marketing. And his blog, I just put it in the chat, is one of my favorite kind of sources of inspiration and insight and thoughts. And in last week, he talked about this guy named Jeremy Bentham, who 200 years ago wrote a pamphlet on how we use words. And I thought, when I read that, I particularly thought of you, David. And I'm going to share my screen really quick, and I'll drop the URL in the. FY, you're sounding quite quiet. Let me put my headphones in. Sorry, Mr. Anderson's telling me not working. Is that better? Okay. So let me share this. So this is and again, I haven't been able to consume all of this, but given what David's often talking about, this and I'll drop it in the chat. So Seth says 200 years ago, Betham wrote a pamphlet on how we use words and tell ourselves our stories. And he's like, it's archaic and dense, but really, really practical and valuable. So let me find the chat again here. Oops. And one thing that was particularly interesting I found in the chart was this view that he had on different semantics of words. I might have to stop sharing my screen to see if I can find it again. Yeah, let me drop it. But basically, he said, let me stop sharing. I'll see if I can find it so you guys don't have to see it. So basically, what he was suggesting was that words inherently have a tonal alignment towards them, and concepts that we have typically have three words associated with them, and those words can be either positive, neutral, or negative. And depending on which of the three derivations of a particular word for a concept that we use will inherently be biasing our story narrative based on that choice. So for example, if you use like this person doesn't spend money, they're either I'll look up the word, but they're either cost conscious, petty, or something else. But that idea, the word choices we use for that same kind of idea that they don't like spending money, can influence and bias the language. And I found this kind of idea of the use of words really interesting and inspiring. So I'm wondering too if anybody has any thoughts of exploring those kinds of ideas while we wait for Daniel. David, I brought up words and you're noticeably not talking, so I'm interested.
Well, this is what can I say? Hey, I set it up and you went for the bait. What can I say?
Yeah.
Bruce,
Yeah.
you're up. I mean, because I'm wading into this issue of bringing up words to eager beaver undergraduate business school students. And I'm probably not going to, I'm trying to start with the freshmen or sophomores. I don't want to deal with the seniors because they're looking to step out and be trading, oil futures and make a ton of money. So I want to try to find them early and also and attach them. I mean, a huge issue since we're in this audience, we're all Mac users. It'd be an interesting quiz. How many people on their iPhone know how to get to the dictionary? And my working assumption is very few. Mostly people experience the dictionaries on their iPhone as the annoying spell checker that mangles some word. The last time I looked, I should recount this, there's something like 50 plus Oxford dictionaries available if you want them that come embedded in the Macintosh operating systems. And then we layer in the issue, and I'll step back. A story I'm sure I used. I was talking to my friend about this kind of thing, and we had about an hour at least squabbling over the meaning of the word settlement. And then we finally got around to, hey, we're both carrying iPhones. Let's look it up. And I think there's 6 different definitions of settlement, none of which was appropriate for either one of us was using the word.
Yeah.
So that's, there are formal words that work their way up into they pass muster for the Oxford process, a 400-year-old company. And then there are the localisms and the local jargon and professional jargon. All professions wrap themselves in jargon for a variety of reasons, one of which is to keep out the unwashed. You know, unless you've paid your dues, unless you've been an apprentice for 5 or 10 years, you know, I'm not allowed to talk to you. I don't want to talk to you because you're no, not worth talking to. This is just a basic human instinct.
Yeah.
So and I just think of the variety of professions that are drawn to Tinderbox. It's just delightful. So anyway,
Yeah. This is not what I was looking for, but this is an example
what do you
of.
what do you want? What oh,
No, but this is
there
an
you go.
example. This is an example coming out of his paper that he'll say, and again, I haven't read this, so I can't really give quotes on it, but he'll say like pleasure and pain. So you've got a neutral word, eulogistic word, and a dialogistic word, I guess is how you pronounce it. And again,
and what was that about keeping the unwashed away?
Yeah. So depending on which word you use, you'll be naturally biasing the story. It has fundamentally the same meaning, but the inherent bias that gets brought into the narrative, depending on which of the words you choose, is quite critical, and that's what his whole treatise was on about, like 200 years ago, as I understand it.
Some really good words too. Licorishness.
Use it every day. Use it every day.
Yeah. So, what do others think about that, and how do we? And in this modern age, when one doesn't have the time, is not afforded the time in our society to sit down and really cogitate on specific words like that. How do we do this? When I say us, I primarily mean me. I feel like I don't have time to actually relish in thinking things like that because I'm constantly in the need and mode of production. Yeah, Christoph.
Well, I mean, just like first thought, interesting because you kicked off these three things. The words are either neutral, positive, or negative, and because I'm working on things like that in the last year, so this for me relates very much to the typical fear response. You know, you have to fight, flight, freeze thing. So then I would say there is a fourth type of dimension here, which is making you aware of that. So at least to have a word that makes you understand in what kind of direction you go. And I had a recent word search, being in constant dialogue with friends in the US, and we're looking for a word to explain the German word trauern. That probably knows either German speakers here, I don't think so. But anyway, so there is something, it has to do with when somebody dies or something bad happened and you have to process that. And the word is essentially neutral and indicates that you are processing something to really, in a healing sense. And I was looking, it's not mourning because that's obviously ceremonial. Then there is not grievance, that's occupied in Christian ways. And there's very hard to find a word. And there are plenty of those things that cross-cultural are very hard to express. So I know exactly what you're talking about, and I find dialoguing with people, then you find a workaround, like you have to use half sentence to express what you mean, but there may not be an exact word match.
Yeah. Yeah, and as I had a former business partner, unfortunately, it is former. His point was every human endeavor relies on successful communication,
Mm-hmm.
and that communication is obviously nuanced by the words that we choose to use, and it is a choice. So I don't know. Interesting. Yeah, Tom. And I think, wait, do we have Daniel back yet? No. All right.
I just wanted to say that as a writer, I have to deal with this issue all the time. Because especially nouns have two levels. There's a denotative level as to what it is, and there's a connotative level, which is more hooked into culture. And to use your example of someone who doesn't like to spend money, I might come on a choice between someone who's frugal, which is positive, or someone's a miser, which is negative, or someone who is cost conscious, which is neutral. And to some degree, over a period of time, the selections that you make with this determine your own individual writing style. And this is all hooked up with things like, are you operating out of the Anglo-Saxon part of English, or are you out of the Romanistic part of English? I tend toward the Anglo-Saxon. I'm just more comfortable with it. And as for translating between cultures, as a very old student of German, what the Germans have done is to take a concept and then modify it within the word. Yeah. So what you have is that you have parts of the word that are sort of pre-word, and then parts of the word that are post-word, and they're all made into one word. And if we're translating it into English, you have to use many more words than you would just saying it in German. Anyway, this is my small insight into this sort of struggle that I deal with every day.
It's funny, you made me laugh when you brought up German. So I was met this German woman, and she had talked about how one of the challenges of dating American men is when she has a fight with them, she has to deal with the abstraction layer of English because her natural language is German. And she's like, you automatically have an upper hand because of that abstraction layer of communication, when all I just want to do is swear at you in German, but it doesn't work because it doesn't land. Right. And so it's really, really funny that how that distinction works, because that, to your point, those, and she was trying to explain that the nuance, German swear words are awesome, she said, because they're just so nuanced, and we can't, it doesn't translate. Yeah. Yeah. Chuck.
Well, let me start off by saying that I am one of those people who grew up with the English language, the American or North American English language, and I had, other than a smattering of French when I was a kid and a smattering of Spanish when I was a kid, I had almost no exposure to other languages. But what I've always wondered about English, and I'm wondering if other people here have the insight to expand on the thought, is that largely as a result of the history of how English evolved and the impact of the English Empire, it seems that English has brought in more words and more concepts for more cultures than perhaps other languages. I think that might be the case. I've seen people claim it is, but I wonder if it's true or just chauvinism on the part of English-speaking people. And I think the challenge is not so much just to bring the words in, but to bring in some of the concepts that go with them. And I have found some conversations that have been occurring recently about AI spewing usages of English that are not particularly common in the primarily English speaking world, and kind of wondered, well, maybe one of the things we have with English is that the word choice is different in different cultural environments. So, there's a whole array of new linguistic concepts that emerge when you start dealing with an internationalized society, and we start dealing with non-human entities creating translations creating text. So maybe there are further transformations of our languages that are coming at us, whether we want them to or not. Just some observations.
Yeah, are we on our way to the Blade Runner language, that intermix of multiple languages? All right. Anybody else have any other thoughts? If not, what? Yeah, Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, just to sort. I mean, in answer to Chuck's point, I think it's generally held that English is the Borg of languages. Your distinct cultures will be assimilated pretty damn quickly.
Nice.
But a lot of things also live on as loan words. So whereas other languages would sort of translate a thing, if a phrase like Sturm und Drang just reels off the tongue, people know what it means. Why would you bother to translate it into something where it wouldn't sound half as good? So also there's an echo of things. So there's an odd difference. I mean, the linguistics get very excited about whether something is a true loan word or whether it's a sort of it's translation things. But it's interesting seeing AI writing. The main thing I notice about AI writing is it has fewer obvious grammatical errors. What it lacks is any tonal flow. So it manages
could you say that again?
It lacks any tonal flow. So basically, it's the collar and cuffs don't match. So it'll use vocabulary that doesn't meet the sophistication or lack thereof of its phraseology, and it just sticks out. It certainly comes to mind doing peer review at the moment. Think, oh dear, right? Clearly, this has not been written by a human.
Yeah.
It's a close cousin to the person who decided to sort of spice things up by going to a thesaurus without realizing that they're engaging in a translation that is not sort of direct in the way they think. I made a reference to the rather wonderful David Bellos's book on translation. Now that might seem a reach, but essentially when you take a word and you substitute, you're doing a form of translation. You may be changing the nuance, you may be changing the positivity, negativity, and all these things. And if you don't understand the difference, which most of us don't, be honest, then you actually begin to erode the clarity of what you're trying to say. And it's partly practice. I think back, I still have my very battered copy of the Concise Oxford Dictionary, which, as a young officer, you were required to have at short stay. If you couldn't show your copy of dictionary, Gower's English and Partridge, you were expected to have those three things to your hand because you were going to be doing writing on behalf of somebody else, and you didn't want to sound like an idiot. And you were encouraged to actually look at these books. I know it sounds bizarre, but that's actually where part, I think, the education comes from. It turns out that actually the dictionary is, English dictionary, the Oxford Dictionary is sort of quite readable in small bits. But every time you look something up, look at a couple of things either side, and you find all sorts of wonderful things. Or you see the secondary purposes, because you're absolutely right. You often look something up and it doesn't, well, on the face of it, appear to me what you mean it does. But then if everyone in your community uses the word that way, that's just the current usage. So the written, formal, printed dictionary, it always lags behind sort of verbal use of the language, and it varies massively. And even massively, sitting here with a broadly English-speaking caucus, but sitting on two sides of the pond, the language is actually used quite differently. Not only just in its intonation, the joke is actually if you put the stress on the other end of the word, you can shift from British to American and backwards and forwards, and the trick sort of works. So even just simple things like this sort of make changes. But going back to the point of the sort of AI and things, I mean, it's like I feel I got my money's worth if I read one of the sort of long opinion pieces in the Sunday broadsheets, and I come away with a word that I've never heard before, and I think, well, that's then I got my money's worth. This is a word that has meaning, and if I'd only known this for the earlier part of my life, I would have had reason to use it. So I don't think there is an easy thing. I don't think the AI helps us any. It certainly helps us on the simple level of translation that I could go across, to France or Germany, wherever I, get into a country speaking a language other than my own, and probably get something that won't won't result in me being sort of skewered or smacked around the head because I've said something inappropriate or frightfully rude unintentionally because I didn't understand the language. AI sort of does that bit, but in terms of eloquence and nuance, I think it's pretty tone deaf, or such has been my experience. I'm happy to be wrong on that. That's just one opinion.
Yeah. And Mr. Bernstein, yeah, Christoph, go for it.
I just want to say, well, I just came across someone, a psychologist, who had this concept and says there's language has two aspects. The one thing is the communication, that's when all you think about. The A says something to B. But the other one is that you have this self-cognizing effect. So it helps you to understand how you are and what you actually feel and orders your inner universe by putting it into terms. So then one part of that saying or wording is that you understand better what you actually experience in this particular moment. And since we have all sorts of shades of different experience, which are difficult, we find difficult to put into words, but the very process of trying to do so serves the idea of clarifying something for ourselves.
Yeah,
That
and then
cannot be shortcut by AI in no ways.
right,
Huh? So
right.
it is the question: is it trade-off of enhanced thinking or clarity, or just wording? So just putting that in.
Well, and on that note, I went to my Buddhist Zen session last week, and the priest Misha was actually talking about very similar to that. You know, when you have your lived experience, the word choices you use to reflect that back to yourself really determine your experience. So if you sit there and saying, I'm having a horrible experience, guess what? You're going to be having a horrible experience. If you switch that and say, this is uncomfortable, but I'm learning something and I'm grateful for being here, for having the opportunity to learn, that slight refrain can change your entire experience and your outlook on life. And so in that context, there's this idea that we do really, with our word choices, not just externally, but internally, manifest the life that we are having or that we are experiencing. So I find that fascinating. Difficult to do, but certainly fascinating. Mr. Ted, we haven't seen you in ages. What's going on with you? And thank you for being up at god awful early in the middle of the night.
Well, I'm dialing in from Brisbane, and this is why I've missed you guys until now. But I'm thinking about putting together a fairly ambitious Tinderbox project, and figure it's worthwhile to to become more familiar with how you clever guys are using it.
Can you show us some of the or explain some of the parts? Maybe we've got time. What kind of mechanics or intellectual gymnastics are you looking to have achieved?
So I had a career in the U.S. in research for reasoning of the kind that you can't do today. I would say that you can't do with LLMs, and in fact, you can't do with any set theoretic approach. So we have a startup that uses alternative foundations to reason about the open world, and we have some experiments that we're doing. We have clients, of course, and I'm particularly interested. We have people that can do AI as a service that can take documents. In this particular case, we're looking at neurobiology and the role of how things actually happen in the human brain and the sympathetic nervous system. And those documents tend to be fairly well structured, and there are good ontologies that NIH, that the pre-Trump NIH, put together for understanding and parsing these documents. So we can use AI in a big, heavy way to suck in what's known. As it turns out, we know very little about what goes on in the mind, in the brain. And moreover, we are well, our test case is the extinction of fear memory, which most people think of as PTSD, and its multi-domain appearances and signals as it goes through the body. Now, that's just an example. What we're actually doing is we're building tools to reason about unknowns. And so there's AI to collect what's known. There's post Tinderbox. There's a bunch of, we're a Haskell shop. So we have a bunch of AI to build tools and visualizations. But for us, Haskell is going to be the human part. We're not going to use AI in Tinderbox for its primary use, which is it's going to stretch Tinderbox in a couple ways. One of them is that instead of trying to understand what people know, we want to understand what people don't know and represent it in some way. And we intend to use probably something I haven't heard much people talk about, but I'm absolutely fascinated by Mark's investment in named links. And we are going to map those to typed links. We're going to put some external capability on there and use these type links as transformative links. I don't know whether we're going to be able to do that within Tinderbox or exterior. I'm going to find out from my colleague, Mark Anderson, how possible this is. But we're going to make some significant investments in this space. We have a focused research organization that's going to be helping us on the reasoning side.
So I missed a couple things. If you can go all the way back to the beginning, you made it, first of all, terribly exciting. But can you go back to the comment? You said something about open world or something like that, a difference. You tried to make a distinction between an AI world and some kind of the human reference. And I didn't catch the wordage you used. Do you recall, or does anybody recall?
Well, I mean, the thing is that human beings reason about situations that we have no fact for, whether we have no explicit explanation or representation. So our standard, I don't want to take much time because I will have some things to show in the future and some challenges and interesting things. But open world reasoning, we sponsored some work at Stanford in situation theory.
I'm sorry, open world reasoning is what you're saying?
Open world reasoning. So if
Okay,
I
I'm not
told
familiar with that
you,
term.
well, it's standard in the literature as something that AI can't do, right? So AI reasons about facts. So suppose I told you the following fact: the baby cried. You will have some discrete facts about that. But you will also have a large number of inherited facts, some things that you assume. They're part of the soft, situated understanding of what's going on in the world. Now, suppose I said the next fact you get is the mommy hit the baby again. Oh no, the first fact is the baby cried. The second fact is the mommy picked the baby up. Now you will assume that the mommy is the baby's mommy and that the baby is being picked up to be comforted. But a third one is the mommy hit the baby again. Now each time you're bringing in the reification of unknowns, but until that point you have a variety of unknowns that interpret the things that are discrete. Now it happens that most things in the world are that way. And I can tell you that after 40 years running research for NSA, we have discovered that you just can't do any real reasoning about the real world unless you bring in these open world representations. So that's what we're playing with, and we're just going to use the mind, the brain, as an example because we can do some open source things there.
All right. Reactions? Anybody? Comments? Questions? Thoughts? Curiosities?
Well, I put up one thing, which is because I have Ted to thank for being introduced to the Johari window,
I need coffee.
and it was brought to mind in a the screenshot I just put up on in the chat. Actually, relates back to something I did for the Future of Text gathering just before Christmas back in the UK. It was actually really interesting. It's a group of people talking about doing stuff in XR, and there was a constant non-meeting of minds, and it took a long time for the penny to drop. That the problem was there was a massive. There were two unstated camps. There were the people who essentially were trying to remove ambiguity. They were, if I can't see it, it isn't there. And there are other people who were actually trying to do completely the opposite, which was to explore the potentiality of what of how the juxtaposition can give us serendipitous outputs and things, and all this was struggling to be in the same space. So the 4 boxes there. I'm probably unkind because the Johari didn't use this terminology. This was probably made most famous by Rumsfeld with the unknown unknowns. But it worked. It's sort of known to me, known to others. You can say it all sorts of ways, but it's a quite simple grid. But what I found I hadn't really thought on before, but is this fact that most of our cultural training puts us in the bottom left of this diagram. We're trying to state known things. We're trying to state them clearly, unambiguously, and part of that is that implies a narrative because that's what we're trained to make and trained to understand. But probably for a small number of people, many of whom may be in this very room, we're actually trying to do something quite different. In fact, it's not that all these things we normally use are not useful or irrelevant. It's just that they constrain what we're actually trying to do when we're trying to explore what might be rather than what is. And nor, I should stress, is this some kind of a sort of zero-sum comparison. It's not that. It's just it can be difficult to make yourself the space to have the freedom to explore. I mean, and I think this is where the notion of maps are really interesting. But even those cause confusion because the map is what you see in it. To somebody, it's an absolutely rigid concept map from which there is no departure whatsoever, no colouring outside the lines. For others, the map is a sort of, what it is what I think it is. It goes where it needs to go, and it's very, very freeform. And in fact, the joy of the tool and its support for sort of incremental formalization is just so wonderful in that thing. So as we find things, we can move them from the more serendipitous to the more sort of diffuse end down into the more structured end if we then want to communicate them to others.
I find that fascinating. It kind of keys off what you and I talked about last week, honestly. But one thing and maybe Ted, you can help me come up with a word for this. When I talk to my students often, they're undergraduates and their goal is to get a job and to get off mom and dad's dole, at least for most of them. And I share with them this idea that, there are 3 kinds of knowledge. There's this implicit knowledge, explicit knowledge, and procedural knowledge. And right out of school, most of the time, what companies are looking from you is procedural knowledge. Do you know how to do that thing? And I'm willing to pay that thing so I can get it repeatedly from you in a reliable way. And yet what we're finding is what makes us human is that other knowledge, I think, that Ted's looking for, that critical thinking, that story narrative, that ability to be able to build the gap. I don't know what I'm looking for, but there's another word in that type of knowledge that I think we need to have that I don't have a word for. And if no one wants to respond to that, we can just let Chuck go.
Well, Mark put up the unknown knowns unknowns diagram, and since Donald Rumsfeld made that such a popular term, I've often thought about the confusion of what is being said there. And I've never seen anybody, I'm sure it's been analyzed and I've just missed it, but I've never seen anybody really explain it. And to me, part of what makes that an interesting diagram is because the first word is reflective on my experience. The second word is reflective on global experience. In other words, the only way I can interpret what that means is known to me, known to everybody else. Unknown to me, known to some others. Known to me, unknown to anybody else, and unknown to me and unknown to everybody else. So it's those two different camps that if you don't apply that rational thinking, the terminology is totally confusing. And I wonder if that's a valid interpretation or if it's just me trying to make sense out of Donald Rumsfeld's ramblings.
I think it's really cool. But the other thing to add to that, Chuck, is the comment I was making earlier in today's call about the conversation I had with my son is when one's narrative or story gets
Yeah,
solidified without any additional information known to him is total horseshit.
right.
Like, you think you know. Now, let me give you some information that blows up that worldview. And when I did that to him on Wednesday, he's like, oh my God, I didn't know. And so he was running around this known world. And with, a 3-minute conversation, it blew up his worldview and it now became something very, very different. And so how do you navigate in that? Yeah, Ted.
I'll just report what my feeling is on this known unknowns and unknown unknowns. So if you know something, you can describe it, you can explain it. It falls into the scientific method. It has a rational framework and a logic associated with it. If it is a known unknown, it is something that has an effect that you observe, so you can't pretend it's not there. Like dark matter, let's say, we can see its influence, but we don't know the agent. We also can have some other things that are agents that we know must have some influence, but we don't know what that influence is. So we'll be digging into that with astrocytes. Astrocytes are these amazing things in our mind. Everybody thinks neurons are the master reasoning machinery, but it's now becoming clear that astrocytes are there and they probably have a profound influence. So that's a known unknown. But then there's this whole category of other stuff that influences us. We have no idea what it is. We probably understand the tiniest bit of how the universe works because we just don't have the abstractions or the mechanisms to even perceive it. So in intelligence, we have an awful lot of those facts. There's things going on. I don't know what Stalin's dreams were when he woke up and decided to do some things, but I do know somehow that those dreams affected his killing 27 million people or whatever. So if you're in the business of modeling the world and trying to actually do some useful things, you kind of have to have those things in the mix. But logic doesn't help you with it. Set theory doesn't help you with it. Hey, you have to have other mathematical frameworks to do reasoning with.
And do you have labels for some of those other mathematical frameworks?
Yeah, we use applied category theory. It is the leading candidate for this kind of thing. There's lots of literature on it. There's probably, I'm going to guess, maybe 300 practicing applied category theorists, and they are going to be the ones that do the real revolution, not these tech bros.
And for those that don't understand, can you explain? Because you explained that to me like 2 years ago, and it blew my mind. The set theory category distinction, and if you can anchor that back in when you were doing the fundamental investments in helping us create the internet, like and how we chose set versus category theory to build the internet today.
Yeah,
Can you comment on that a little bit?
not in 30 seconds, no.
No, well, we got a half an hour. We got time if you don't mind.
Well, what I'd much rather do is put together a project that uses Tinderbox we will make an investment to try and populate it with this example. We have other examples, of course, but I think that this neurobiology one is probably going to be the most interesting because it is kind of like how we think and what we think with. So it's got a little bit of reflexiveness in there. The curious thing that we're going to zero in on is the fact that all of the mechanisms we use to do abstract reasoning were not evolved for that purpose, right? So we have all of these compromises with how our perception, our cognition, and our communication affects the limits of what we can reason and communicate about. So that's going to be a kind of an interesting thing. I really want to use Tinderbox for the purpose that I originally was attracted to it for, which is building a very rich worldview. So I'm really excited about that piece of it. The export part we'll struggle with a bit, but at least we can do some interesting things with building these knowledge structures within Tinderbox using these type names.
And I have a question for you. Do you struggle into what thought have you? What thought have you put into around a Tinderbox field being primarily a standalone, non-collaborative environment versus a collaborative environment? Like Tinderbox, in some ways, is like a Word document. Without the cloud environment, you can't collaborate with other people very easily with it. Like, has that come into your thought processes?
Yeah, I'm getting an awful lot of pushback, and we're going to have to work around that in a bit. So we're I have some collaborators. I'm just going to have to share a Tinderbox or do some kind of version control. But I'm much more attracted to the knowledge enrichment capabilities that can be offered here. So we may end up doing a lot of open source collaboration before stuff gets into Tinderbox. And you just use Tinderbox for that stuff that you just can't get over the line in terms of identifying holes, identifying stuff that you don't know. And there's probably, gosh, only about a half a dozen folks that I would trust to do that with anyway.
Christoph.
Yeah, excuse me, I may ask something very stupid, but this word knowledge appears here in a central place in what you say in all your research that you do. And I'm just wondering, from my personal perspective, I make a distinction between what I could call like third person knowledge, which is like knowledge about outer world and so forth, and evidence comes from any number of scientific reasons or agreement or whatever. And then on the contrary, like first person knowledge, which comes from your inner understanding of world, which does not depend on the outer references. So you have to be completely on your own to establish evidence from your own part. And so we're just wondering where this term knowledge that you are centering around is to be located in these two worlds.
Oops.
Did I say something meaningful? I'm not sure.
Something has just quit on my computer. I really think that rather than me sort of dancing around concepts, it would be much, much more useful in the coming months for me to be bringing this project because the whole point of the project is to explore how this stuff works in a useful way. So I'm gonna try and defer any talk about that. Really, what we're trying to do is we're trying to tease out the intuitions of how the world works, regardless, sort of populated by the pins of things that we can validate by direct observation and understanding, and sort of see if we can get a mirror into some dynamics that are beyond the science at the moment. The human brain is a great one for this because we just can't go in and dissect people. So, the things that we can measure are so indirect, and our mice, our rodent, and our animal models are just not the same.
By the way, have you looked at liquid AI? According to the MIT studies, and again, I don't know the language, so I'm just going to parrot back what I heard. I'll be an AI in this context. I'm just going to spit it out with no intelligible understanding of what I'm saying. According to the founder of AI, Liquid AI, when I heard her talk, she's an MIT professor. They modeled their AI model off of a worm's brain, and they can come up with the same, if not better, outputs from a 100,000 neuron AI system versus theirs, which is a 19 neuron AI system. And as a result of that, edge-based use, privacy, lower energy, but more importantly, they actually can map how the AI is coming to that conclusion. Because in a 100 knowledge neuron system, she said you can't follow the paths. But in their model, they can actually see how and which neurons triggered to get it to come to that answer. So that's as far as I understand it. And I saw her give a talk at the Computer History Museum a couple months ago. So you might want to check out Liquid AI. It's pretty interesting.
No, I know all about that stuff.
Okay.
So, look, we'll bring some examples. I'll try and show up to these things. It's, as I say, it's after 4:00 now in the morning. So I'm gonna check out if you don't mind, and I hope to show up with some really interesting stuff in the months ahead.
But by the way, Ted, before you leave, I don't know if you were on the call when we talked about that. We did talk about trying to find another time that would work for our brethren living in Asia. So is it like a Pacific Friday night standard time for a Saturday morning call? If you could put some thoughts on that, let's think about how we can find a way to get to have live community at a reasonable time for our Asian friends, the people, our friends that live in Asia.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Awesome.
See you guys later.
Bye bye. All right, Mr. Anderson.
I'll just pass by again something I put in the chat, which was thinking because the word of collaboration came up. And I think it's so much, I see an awful lot of co-presence. I see very little collaboration. A lot of co-presence is, 10 people all shouting to be in charge and not much getting done. It's something like your Google Docs. Collaboration is something that's done well, is remarkably useful and gainful, and often involves the ability to, in a sense, pass out some of the responsibilities. So not everyone's trying to do everything all the time. What they're actually trying to do is to contribute in a meaningful and productive way. And it did make me think. And this was prompted by the comment that, well, okay, is sort of Tinderbox a single person tool? And the question is, has anyone actually seen a tool that they would call actual collaborative writing as opposed to co-presence? I.e. multiple people editing in the same session, which is not collaboration in my mind.
Anybody?
Mark, would you mind expanding a little bit further? Because I think it's an interesting concept, and it makes me think about how we use Google Docs, which isn't really collaborative. It's more sequential or serial, if you will, rather than parallel.
Well, okay. I mean, the danger is here in being perhaps a bit, as ever, my tendency to be a bit glib. I'm not trying to be disparaging these things. And the reality is, of course, we have to use the tools we have. So something like Google Docs is free and we can all use it. And hey, it's better than something else. But I just I go back to my youth at sea where I worked. I used to stand on the bridge and drive the ship, and other people, for instance, in the engine room. I didn't have to understand exactly what they did, but I had to have a very good idea about how I wouldn't mess up what they were doing. And that's what I think in terms of sort of collaboration writing. And the closest I've come to it, fun enough, is working in Overleaf, working on a paper. where I'm often working with a co-collaborator, but we're doing quite different things. So they will be writing the narrative arc, and I'll be sort of, fixing gaps and typos and references as we go. But it's a synergistic process, because as one backfills the other's work, new things come to the fore. So actually, it's a really quite rich form of writing. But the main thing that's happening there is, though, those two people are not, in a sense, just writing across one another, which is what I think often happens in something that's so as unbounded as, say, Google Docs. And the other thing, the last thing I'll say before I shut up is of course, we're not trained to do this either. We constantly demand to have everything everywhere all the time and be able to do, mush anything together at a moment's notice. But I think most of us have no training in really the nuance of what that involves. I'll stop there.
So just for my clarification, are you thinking of that there's like sections 1, 2, and 3, and each person takes a section? Or I'll tell you, we write collaborative progress notes for my social skills programs. One person takes primary point, if you will, and writes the original note, and then passes it on to the others who look at it. Maybe they had a different point of view, they add in, they tweak it, we create it to be a more granular note. And I consider those 360-degree view notes, which we get a lot of compliments on how detailed they are.
Yeah, I think there's an element to that. Whether you do it sort of sequentially or whether, depending on how well you know the other person, and you may be able to go as long, because, for instance, the person I'm often writing with in the papers is that they literally, if we're both online at the time, they'll just drop comments as they write, pointing to bits they'd like me to fill in if they know I'm there, kind of thing. And that's actually remarkably useful, because often you can actually, in a sense, fulfill that request in near real time, whilst they haven't passed on to elsewhere. And that's probably the most collaborative I work. But what you've stated, Bruce, I think is true, because really what's happening there is you've got, say, 3 different people who aren't treading one another's toes. So you're not all trying to write the same part of the narrative. And there's an understanding that there are other people who may be able to contribute something that you don't have. And the upside of that, I think, is you get a degree of relaxation. Instead of worrying about the bits that you don't know, but which you know are required, you can get on with putting in the bits you do know. And if you get to the end and there's still a gap, well, then everyone can sort of come together and try and do that. But in the meantime, there's no wasted effort of people basically marching across one another. I see numerous hands up. I'll shut up.
It's interesting. I could be way off on this. I'm not heavily medicated, so I think I'm lucid. And anyway, I think of multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary. And for me, the pinnacle is transdisciplinary, because in multidisciplinary, everyone just has their own little lane and they stay in it, but they all live in the same house. And in interdisciplinary, yes, you talk a little bit back and forth, but you still stay in your own lane. And transdisciplinary is where you're given permission to lightly step on each other's toes and to use. So I might make a medication recommendation to a psychiatrist at the same time, yielding to their superior expertise. It's that kind of thing. And that's the model when I've been able to enact that. And that's what my own program does. I find that the most rewarding, and I think that contributes to why we consistently get positive results. I look at that in the writing, and I think that there's probably some parallels there.
Yeah, Christoph.
Just to throw in my penny here. When I heard you, Mark, talk about this, you were asking, like, does anyone have an experience with some way how to do that? And the necessity to have this multi-dimensional communication with people occurred to me once when, in the situation, we used Slack as a communication medium. Oh. And if I had to respond to your question right now, and even if we're talking with 2 people, so there is the actual text that we're working on, or parts that everyone does on his part, and we have one channel for each this. You can comment on every single word in there. You can have facts thrown in another channel. You can have meta discussion or ideas that pop up randomly and disconnected in another channel. So this is more like how my brain works when I talk face to face with someone. I have to coordinate all this, and maybe 90% of that is just kept in random memory, but then only a few goes onto paper. But if this is trying to be more solidified, then I would, at this given point in time, I have only Slack in my knowledge to be able to do things like that.
Mr. Chuck. By the way, Slack, I've never been able to successfully use it. If anybody can tell me, I find it so difficult. Yeah, go ahead, Chuck.
You guys are going to think it's me being a broken record again. But I think if I look back on my own career, the collaborative events that have been most successful are those that leveraged email threads or email listservs. And I can easily point to multiple listservs that have run for decades, where you have a collection of people who are experts in multiple disciplines. I really like Bruce's terminology there, but bringing thoughts together about issues that are relevant back in the 80s, back in the 90s, back in the early 2000s, back in the last decade, and sharing their knowledge and experience throughout all of this, often leading to reports that get generated and put into, in my world, the IETF or the FCC comments, or thoughts on standards and the development of various technologies. But still, one of the things that comes out of that is you can't have a group too large, but collaboration is much easier if it's just 2 or 3 people. And when you get to a dozen people, you've really got to have a discipline amongst the actors to work with some medium. And an email was developed originally for this purpose, to allow people trying to get the ARPANET up and running to share their experiences. What worked, what didn't work, what would we do different? What problem are we not addressing yet? That kind of dialogue. And so I think it's doable. But as you were saying, Michael, about Slack, I mean, if you don't have other people who use the tool effectively, you're not going to learn to use the tool effectively. Mm-hmm. And Slack may be broken by the ineffectiveness of other people using it or the abuse they make of the tool. And email discussions and threads, just like all the other social media, can be abused or it can be leveraged. And so I think it's the collaboration is a function of the people involved, and they're willing to engage, and whether or not you've got a tool that allows them to share the relevant information and do so over time. That's it.
Yeah. Which really kind of just brings us back to this whole idea of which tools work and how, and even Christoph's question about workflow, which Andres has kicked off a few months ago. And just it's not just any one tool as well. It's actually an entire workflow, which ultimately is, and I think, and this is why I try to teach my students too. And it goes back to the Theodore Levitt comment in the 60s of, people don't want the drill, they want the hole. At the end of the day, I don't want your work. I don't want what you're doing. I want what the output of your work does. And so how do we get how do we get those workflows? How do we make it all, figure out which tool works with that? And then how do we, you ultimately end up, like in my doctoral dissertation work, sadly, the last 8 months of my doctorate dissertation was abject hell because it fell down to the common denominator, a word, to get the project done, because that was the lowest common denominator tool that, my committee used. And it was just painful. So like, how do you deal with that kind of tool selection in the collaboration effort? Mark Anderson.
I was just thinking, I did sort of link to it in the chat because this morning Ted Goranson had actually sort of started asking. I've known about this project he's talking about for a while. It's coming up on the things that I'm sure will be as taxing as Tinderbox as the thing I did from in version 5. I'm now reminded all those years ago where we We created 4 sites out of 1 Tinderbox, which is kind of crazy, but it all worked. And I was just thinking, because he was asking, okay, so how do it sort of we skate around in the terms of that best practice thing. I thought this is actually really quite interesting because in the sense that collaboration, it works on certain levels. And things like version control, am I worried about they've got exactly the same attribute set? Have they got the same rules and something? Am I thinking in terms of just diffing the whole file because somebody's added an extra word in one textual note? And the truth is, it will be all of these things in different times in different places. And I was reflecting on that when I was trying to talk to him, because of course they're actually, I think you probably have a different practice for each. And it made me think too about all the work that a couple of people here, notably Chuck and Michael, have put into things like installers for adding complex process into another Tinderbox, which is interesting. That's yet another form of sort of version where essentially you're going to do this broadly the once. It's not something you're probably going to do every day. You might sort of do it once and then install a later version and update it. But that in itself is a different sort of coordination you're trying to achieve. So in other words, there is, am I conversant with this particular baseline? And it's quite interesting in that to reflect, certainly in the last year or so of changes to Tinderbox, things that we can do now that we can't, in terms of just checking, okay, are these things here? Not so much is the value of this thing what I think it is, but even if I got all these bits and pieces, do the following things exist at all? Because frankly, if they don't exist, I probably don't need to go to the next level of checking, because I've got to fix this before I go to that. So anyway, that thread's open there, and I imagine that there'll be some people will probably have some useful things to say there. It's in the main forum. So thanks.
By the way, just reacting to on your comment about Chuck and my work, one of the things I found fascinating now that I've been sitting on some of my files for some cases 4 years, but the installer work more recently, last 12 months or so, is the inherent assumptions that I built into the workflow, such that when I was building them, I didn't realize that they were there. And even for myself, when I came back 6-9 months later to use one of my own files, I'm like, what the hell was I thinking? And it could take a half a day to untease the unstated assumptions that I didn't even realize I had. Independent of the mistakes that one makes, and you find those too. But like, barring the mistake issues, the unstated assumptions, even to yourself, and a number of months later, are astounding. It's just like, oh my God, what was that? How and why did I make that decision, and how that influenced yet architecturally other things that came down the road. So, I mean, Chuck, I don't know if you've experienced that, but what are your thoughts on how we, and just doing that with yourself is hard enough, let alone with other people that have to then use your tool.
Well, what cropped up when you were talking is sort of an extrapolation to, a larger work. And way back in my youth, back in the 70s, I developed a reputation, which I've been known by my colleagues throughout my career for being good at, which is I find bugs. I find problems other people don't see.
Yeah.
And I'm curious enough, in many cases, I go digging and I find out, why did that occur? What is wrong there? And back in the 70s, somebody commented, you're really good at this. And what it was at the time was a mini computer real-time operating system, which I was familiar with, but was not an author of, was just a user of it. And my comment back was off the top of my head, and I said, well, the trick to understanding Vortex, the operating system at the time, is understanding the criminal mind that developed it. It was a joke. But you know what? Throughout the rest of my career, I've realized that's kind of what it is. Criminal mind is pejorative, and that's the wrong term.
Going back to the words we used earlier today.
Right. It's a process of getting out and thinking about the context in which something exists, whether it be a written word, a musical composition, piece of technology, if you can get your head around what that is and what the persona who developed it were thinking about, then you can understand it better. And you can begin to get some insights of where it deviates from the norm you would expect. And that's, I don't know, is there's a methodology that you can apply there. I'm sure lots of people have written all kinds of things about doing that. But I think it's a mindset of being free enough to go out and think from the perspective of the people who developed it. And because I enjoy listening to music, I often just find myself listening to a piece of music and thinking, not so much what are they trying to say, but what does their composition represent? And where could it go beyond what they did? Things like that. So again, part of you think about musical collaboration. When Beethoven wrote the Ninth Symphony, unable to hear, he was dependent upon the collaboration of lots of musicians, everywhere from people who banged the drums to people who sang the choral and brought it all together. And I'm not sure we've ever achieved collaboration that goes beyond that level of integration and group think and people working together. But with a central mind coordinating it and pulling it all together, even though he couldn't hear what he was doing. So, wild thoughts.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Time to go shovel snow.
It's interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine who's got a company, Athovia. I'll go ahead and drop it in here. And I was talking to their primary investor last week. And what I find fascinating with some of these tools and the work we've done, and to your point, the criminal minds behind it, because my friend Kim's the one that's built all the tech here, is really interesting in that she's built an AI decision making tool for business, particularly small to medium sized businesses, that lets you incrementally stage your thinking along the stage and apply different agentic models and different well established business frameworks at each stage. And so it's this incredibly powerful platform behind the scenes that essentially lets you customize the different stages of your workflow for your business. And generally this group would understand that kind of statement, but the challenge is when they're going out and trying to talk to people, no one gets what a flexible they're basically built a Tinderbox like AI platform but up in the cloud. And no one gets that. And what they want to hear is that concrete use case experience of using that tool. But then when you just simplify it down to that single idea, then they're like, well, then that's not my problem because I'm not in marketing or I'm not in that kind of work. And I just think this is part of the challenge we have with all of this kind of thinking is if you abstract the idea down to a specific use case, it gets so specific that no one wants to talk about it. If you abstract it up to the generalities and the power of it, then no one can wrap their head around it and it becomes totally difficult. Yeah, Christoph, how do you balance that? I guess that's my question.
Well, I'm just trying to into one word of use a little earlier on where you said people don't want to hear how you drill the hole, you want to get the hole done. Huh? And yeah. I was thinking about that. Is that really true? And when I connect what was just said before, then actually the process to achieve that is the context of how things then finally manifest. And if you were to understand what's finally manifest, you need that context, how it came about. And just read a very interesting article about some school in Texas. The literature class, the lady is completely banning AI from her class and have people do it all handwritten, and she's grading the various steps on the road to make people know how the things evolve, which sort of, as I understand, makes them really get to the point of ability of knowing how to use all this. And if I see, for example, Tinderbox as a manifest product, the steep learning curve that I have experienced here would have been much easier if I had understood the concepts that made particular the user environment become like it is. But there is no things like this. There is wonderful explanations of use cases of Tinderbox and so on. But to get out behind the very mechanics and have a easier learning curve, somebody would say, oh, yeah, we did that because we thought that would be helpful at this time. So basically, it's all dialogue. The whole world is dialogue. It's like answer to a question. If there's no question, there's no answer. And you can only understand the answer when you understand the question. And we find ourselves in a world that is showering us with answers, but we hadn't time to come up with the questions for all these answers.
Seems like the restaurant at the end of the universe where they go to the computer that knew all things. You know, what's the answer? 42. What's the question? I don't remember. Yeah.
So, but it was a little side hint to Mark Bernstein in deep respect for all your work that is slight hints for how things came about. There's a lot of history and coming like as a site entering person here, I'm sometimes lost, and I waste hours and hours of time without need.
Well, and that's interesting. Mark Anderson and I were actually talking about that on Thursday, where we were discussing the nature of Tinderbox. And it's like so many things. If you look at it just its parts, like AKA the software of it, you're thinking, well, it's just a tool and it does this. But thinking about it in that context solely without understanding the deep academic, intellectual thinking and history behind the decisions that have led to making this happen. Not to mention, I'm sure Mark, you would wouldn't discount this, the community contribution to making this happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So can you comment, as we're wrapping up today's meeting, can you kind of talk about that too? This idea is not just a piece of software; it's also decades and decades and decades of intellectual thought that has come into this.
There are, I mean, in a serious sense, it's centuries. Just on the question of note taking, where we started this discussion, people have been talking explicitly about taking notes more effectively since Locke, and Locke's commonplace approach was hugely influential, and lots of people have tried it. We teach students to make notes. We've been doing this for a very long time. But in fact, do we know what works in taking notes? No, we just know what helped us or what helped our favorite students. This is another area where AI is absolutely a spectacular opportunity. We can teach AIs to use Tinderbox and have them take notes in Tinderbox and see how they do. And do it over and over again because, like, they have nothing better to do. We don't have to bribe them to do long psychological studies. We just say, here's $20. Do this 500 times. So we can actually objectively look at effective note-taking strategies for the first time. But also, if in the past, if you were using Tinderbox and got stuck and weren't sure whether you had a fundamental question, or were just pushing the wrong button,
or missing a semicolon,
missing a semicolon, like, this is what you mean, and it's not working, and it would be hard. Today, wherever you are in the world, you can get onto the forum, and you'll probably have an answer in an hour or so. Or you can ask Claude, and it'll guess, but it may guess right. And one of my favorite programming maxims is it often takes two people to solve a really difficult bug, but only one of them needs to know anything about it. And so there's a lot here. It is interesting that despite its reputation for having a huge learning curve, Tinderbox can do quite remarkably well manipulating Tinderbox blindfolded. It can't see the views. It has to work out what the views would look like by inspecting the attributes. So it's both blindfolded and it only has a page and a half cheat sheet. It doesn't get to look at ATB ref. It doesn't get to read Tinderbox help. It's got page and a half, and it does remarkably well. So that's another interesting data point.
All right. Well, first and foremost, I'd like to congratulate you all on your active participation and not whining because Daniel couldn't show. I'm sure his technical issues were as frustrating for him as it was for us, and we had to fill the gaps. So thank you all very much for showing up and
he
participating
promises
today.
to record a talk for us. So we'll have what we should have had today online shortly.
Or can he show up next week?
We'll try to reschedule.
Yeah, if we can reschedule, that would be great. But yeah, that was a good job, team, for filling in the gap. that was fun today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Right.
Take care.
All right. And are you? By the way, are you a Patriots fan there, Mark?
Yeah. So
all right.
Go Patriots.
Okay. All right, everybody. See ya. Bye.